in the world. This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed Attaf is in Kigali to take part in his capacity as representative of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, in the 30th commemoration of the 1994 genocide. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Ammar Benjama, has called on the international community to act immediately to put an end to the genocidal aggression on Gaza, which is on the brink of famine. As more pressure has been put on the Israeli authorities to allow in more aid to Gaza, several people have been killed in new Israeli airstrikes targeting several parts of the Palestinian territory. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail. Good afternoon. I'm joined today by my colleague Kamal Miller. And hi, Kamal. How are you?
Hi, Mohammed.
So, first in our news, Prime Minister Nadir Al-Arbawi has presided over at the Great Mosque of Algiers a religious ceremony on the occasion of the Night of Destiny, also known as Laylat al-Qadr. During the ceremony, the winners of the national competition for the reciting, declamation or psalmody of the Holy Quran were honored, as well as the winners of the Algerian International Competition for the revival of the Islamic heritage and the support of young reciters of the Holy Quran. The ceremony, organized under the high patronage of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, in his presence or in the presence of officials of the presidency, the rector of the Great Mosque of Algiers, and representatives of the Arab and Muslim diplomatic corps accredited to Algiers, and scholars as well. Algeria's permanent over to you now.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks in Kigali with his Rwandan counterpart. Saying that has held bilateral talks in Kigali with his Rwandan counterpart, Mr. Vincent Biruta, as part of his working visit to the Republic of Rwanda. According to a communiqué released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the two parties reviewed the relations of friendship, solidarity and cooperation between Algeria and Rwanda, hailing the new positive dynamic which characterizes these relations thanks to the particular interest granted by the leaders of the two countries, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune and President Paul Kagame. The two ministers also agreed on a series of concrete measures aimed at reinforcing bilateral relations through the activation of cooperation mechanisms, notably the Joint Commission for Economic Cooperation and the expansion of cooperation and exchanges in new areas such as energy and the pharmaceutical industry. They also discussed at length the development in the situation in the region, namely the Great Lakes and the Sahel-Saharan regions. Back to you, Mohammed.
Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Ammar Benjama, has called on the international community to act immediately to put an end to the genocidal aggression carried out by the Israeli authorities against the Palestinian people and allow the delivery of substantial food aid to the Gaza Strip, which is on the brink of famine. Mr. Benjama's statement was made during a meeting of the UN Security Council at the request of Algeria on the situation of humanitarian workers and the risk of famine in Gaza. The Algerian ambassador noted on the occasion that the aggression against the innocent Palestinian people has reached its 6th month, recalling that since October 7, the Israeli occupying authorities have killed more than 33,000 Palestinians, more than 70% of whom were children and women, including 224 humanitarian workers and 484 health workers. Let's listen to Mr. Benjama.
Today, we are gathered once again as the aggression against the innocent Palestinian civilian reach for its 6-month mark in 2 days. 6 months. 6 months of barbarity and collective punishment. 6 months of suffering for the people of Gaza. 6 months that test the humanity of each and every one of us. 6 months that test the international order and our ability to preserve coexistence for future generations. 6 months that pushed the entire population of Gaza into famine.
Evoking the International Court of Justice, ICJ, Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations argued that the Palestinians of Gaza no longer face a risk of famine, but a famine that is already taking place. To remedy the situation, he went on to say, a series of professional measures were issued by the ICJ to alleviate the sufferings of the Palestinian people, adding in this context that the Security Council also called for an immediate ceasefire through its resolution 2728.
The ICJ observed, and I quote, Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only a risk of famine, but that famine is setting in. To address this situation, the ICJ issued 2 orders to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. However, the Israeli occupying power did not comply. Finally, the Security Council also acted by demanding an immediate ceasefire through its resolution 2728. Yet, more than 10 days after its adoption, the occupying power blatantly refuses to implement it.
Benjama stressed that the Israeli killing machine is ignoring all UN resolutions providing for a humanitarian ceasefire and continues its heinous and barbaric crimes against defenseless civilians, confident that it will never be held accountable or responsible.
From a killing machine that commits all violation of international law with total impunity, they are confident that they will be never held accountable, and the occupying power continues to commit more and more crime, more and more violation. We must put an end to this aberration.
Referring to the death of 7 humanitarian workers, members of the World Central Kitchen NGO, who were killed in a strike in Gaza, Algeria's ambassador to the United Nations affirmed that this crime is not surprising and is not an exception. He stressed that the attack targeted systematically the aid workers, car by car, as stated by the founder of World Central Kitchen.
The crime perpetrated against World Central Kitchen personnel is not surprising and is no exception. It was an attack that targeted them systematically, car by car, as stated by Chief Jose Andres, the founder of World Central Kitchen. It is just a new chapter in the book of crimes committed. The victims are not Palestinian. Their savage killing is evenly commendable.
Finally, Mr. Benjama warned that the situation in Gaza will further deteriorate with a decision to freeze the operations of World Central Kitchen and the Maritime Corridor from Cyprus, denouncing the campaign led by the Zionist entity to block and dismantle the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, considered the backbone of humanitarian operations in Gaza. And the permanent mission of Algeria to the United Nations office at Geneva on Palestine has affirmed that the Human Rights Council should support and implement the resolution calling for an end to all arms sales to the Israeli government as a moral duty in order to hold the Israeli occupier accountable for its continued violation of international law. Following the adoption by the United Nations Human Rights Council of a resolution providing for an end to all arms sales to the Zionist entity, the Algerian mission highlighted in a press release that the moral failure of certain countries defending the policies of the occupier and its so-called right to self-defense by supporting it with weapons and ammunition that are used against Palestinian children, women, the elderly, and the disabled. He added that it is also a guarantee for Israel's continued targeting of hospitals, UN and diplomatic facilities, as well as humanitarian personnel inside and outside the occupied Palestinian territories, which calls into question the credibility and relevance of the Council. people. In this context, the mission stressed that over the last 6 months, the Israeli occupier had written a new atrocious chapter concerning the tragedy of the Palestinian people, which has lasted for 75 years, noting that in occupied Palestine, all moral and legal humanitarian values have collapsed due to the silence of the international community. Over to you, Majid.
Yeah, as more pressure has been put on the Israeli authorities to allow in more aid to the Gaza, several people have been killed in new Israeli airstrikes targeting several parts of the Palestinian territory. The news agency Wafa said several Palestinians' houses were hit by the strikes in the southeastern and western parts of the town of Gaza, as well as the southern region of Khan Yunis. This brought to over 33,000 the number of people killed since the Israeli army launched its operations on Gaza 6 months ago. This came as the head of the United Nations Humanitarian Affairs Coordination Office, OCHA, expressed deep concerns at the outgoing tragedy in the Gaza Strip and stressed that such a situation could no longer last. Addressing in a United Nations Security Council meeting on the situation in Gaza, he argued that the 6-month-long aggression and destruction of Gaza, which caused destruction, trauma, and suffering, were calling into question humanity and its common priorities. Earlier, the United Nations Security Council Antonio Guterres described as scattered and insufficient the measures taken by the Israeli government aimed at allowing the entry of more aid to the distressed population of Gaza. Addressing the press in New York, he stressed that it was time to silence the arms and put an end to the potential famine before it was too late. Back to you, Mohammed.
And in Morocco now, several thousands of people have demonstrated again in Casablanca in support of the Palestinian people and to denounce the Israeli massacres in the Gaza Strip and the normalization agreement reached between the Moroccan authorities and Israel. According to the media that reported the information, the normalization is a contract. The people changed slogans hostile to Israel's occupation and to the ongoing attacks on Gaza. And still in Africa, the UN Security Council has condemned in its strongest words the recent attacks against the peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO, and denounced the foreign military support brought to several armed groups. The attack targeted the MONUSCO and its personnel, seriously wounding some peacekeepers, and on the request of the Congolese authorities, the UN force began its withdrawal in the southern province of Kivu, and which the peacekeepers are due to leave by April 30th. The World Food Programme has warned against a worsening of the food crisis in war-torn Sudan, despite the delivery of emergency aid in Darfur for the first time in several weeks. 2 convoys carrying food from Chad for 250,000 people in need of emergency food aid reached Darfur at the end of March. The World Food Programme spokesperson in Sudan, Mrs. Lenny Kinsley, reported that the first distribution of the aid has started in the west and center of Darfur in the west part of the country. The aid delivery followed long negotiations held by the UN agency to reopen the humanitarian corridors from Chad after they were closed last February. And in Slovakia, citizens today went to the polls as part of the second round of the presidential election. Opinion polls said the Speaker of the Parliament, Mr. Peter Pellegrini, secured 51% of the votes intentions against 49% for his main rival, former Foreign Minister, Mr. Ivan Korchok. And finally, Mexico has said it severs its diplomatic relations with Ecuador after Ecuadorian police officer burst into the Mexican embassy to arrest former Vice President George Glass, who had taken refuge there. Mexican President Andres Manuel López Obrador denounced on his X platform the intervention of blatant violation of international law and the sovereignty of Mexico. Mexico granted asylum on Friday to George Glass, who had taken refuge in its embassy in Quito since December 17 and was the subject of an arrest warrant for alleged corruption. Quito immediately described this decision as illegal. The Ecuadorian Ministry of Communication explained that each embassy has a unique objective to serve as a diplomatic space with the aim of strengthening relations between countries, adding that no criminal can be considered a policy or politically persecuted person. With this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Before moving on to our program, let's remind you the major headlines. Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmad Attaf is in Kigali to take part in his capacity as representative of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, in the 30th commemoration of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Ammar Benjama, has called on the international community to act immediately to put an end to the genocidal aggression on Gaza, which is on the brink of famine. And as more pressure has been put on Israel or the Israeli authorities to allow in more aid into Gaza, several people have been killed in new Israeli airstrikes targeting several parts of the Palestinian territory. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin for today. We leave you now with this special program devoted to the holy fasting month of Ramadan with my colleague Mazari Lusfer. As for me and my colleague Majid Mila, so we'll be back tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin in English. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International, and bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye. Ahmed.
In the 5th year of Islam,